Well, the locals have a saying, if they're not rising in the pools, nymph them in the riffles. And that's what we're going to be doing today here on the Mataura River. Firstly, we're going to identify stable nymphing style water. Generally, I'm looking for more stability, such as more cobbles, areas with nice stable sort of structure, places that haven't been blown around by floods or aren't too low and algae covered due to our low autumn waters. Secondly, I'm going to be looking for good currents, good pockets, good seams that I could focus on. If I can't see these fish and target them sight fishing with nymphs, then I'm going to have to work the water. And reading the water is important when fishing big water like we often have in the lower reaches. But importantly is just sneaking up for almost unseen fish in these middle reaches of the Mataura. Today I'm going to be using an 8'8" 5-weight Scott G series rod to handle my little tungsten bead heads once I get into the deeper water, but also going to have enough finesse to present those unweighted nymphs and little dries as I need to. I'm going to be fishing a 10-foot 5X Trout Hunter taper leader, nylon, as well as extending that with a tippet ring out to about 15 to 16 feet with 5 to 6X tippet. My flies are going to be small in keeping with the naturals that we've already seen under the rocks. And basically, I'm going to be fishing small mayfly variants. I might start off with a bright bead at the front or a little hotspot nymph at the front and follow that with a very small, nice, lightly weighted natural at the back. And if I start catching more fish on the brighter fly, then I'm going to switch both flies to that brighter pattern. If they seem to be preferring the naturals, I'm then going to start focusing more on natural style nymphs. I generally keep my flies fishing as a team, so in riffly water I keep them about a foot apart. If I'm deep nymphing slower riffles or slower runs or deeper pools, I'll spread that out a bit more, up to maybe 3 feet if needed, and maybe suspend a lighter fly on a dropper up above. Mayflies are the bread and butter of our autumn time fishing. Over the winter months, in the cooler temperatures, it takes longer for the nymphs to mature, and so they mature at a larger size. That's why you find people fishing 12s and 14s early season on our southern rivers. However, as summer kicks in with more optimal temperatures, you'll notice that the mayfly nymphs, they mature a lot quicker, which means a much smaller size. Throughout our summer months, and particularly the autumn, it becomes a domain of the size 16 and 18 imitations. Despite the plethora of mayfly, they're not always in the drift. They will get washed off rocks indiscriminately throughout the day. However, first thing in the morning, you'll notice that trout will more so key in on smaller case caddis and green free-living caddis that get washed out of the heavy water. Trout are opportunistic feeders and make the most of whatever's there in the greatest quantity. And in rivers like this, they do have a choice. Mayfly nymphs will let go of the rocks, often in unison, and drift back a number of feet to meters in search of new grazing territory. This invertebrate drift can really excite the fish and get them going, and move them high up into the riffles and into the shallows in search of this prolific prey. Okay, here's your classic Mataura nymphing riffle. It's very stable with larger cobbles rather than a lot of fine gravels, and harbours a lot of mayfly and caddis nymphs. It's got a good drop in from the top and flattens out part way through. Generally I find that area where the gradient changes from steep to flatter to be the hotspot of any riffle. However, as you can see here, there's a nice shape to this riffle too, how it peters out down the bottom. So I'm going to start off initially with softer flies down in that soft water as it starts gaining momentum. I'm going to nip my way up into the riffle. And as the day gets on, or as the hatch becomes more imminent, trout will move right into the very, very top shallow sections of these riffles, migrating upstream to where they're finding the majority of the food. Now, with the river being low, I'm going to be fishing mostly unweighted or lightly weighted nymphs, always in a pair. And I'm going to be fishing them under an indicator at a pretty short distance above my top fly. Let's have a look at our rigging. Now, as you've seen in earlier videos this season, I've become a huge fan of Euro nymphing Mataura riffles. I'm getting a deeper drift, a slower drift, with smaller flies. I certainly feel that I'm making the most of a lot of those softer takes, those takes that barely register with your indicator, as I'm feeling them as my flies bounce along the bottom. However, today we're going to focus on suspension nymphing, on your typical indicator nymphing, for that's what the majority of southern anglers tend to focus on. Now, we're going to discuss the indicator size, shape and materials, as well as looking at how we apply them to our leaders and the positioning as I move through this run. Okay guys, so I've just set my rig up for this riffle behind me. What I've gone with today is my standard go-to, which is the New Zealand strike indicator system. I'm a big fan of using a wool indicator because it's light, it's easily clipped down and customizable, it floats well as being easy to see, and most importantly for clients, easy to cast. Now I'm keeping it very small, about the size of my little fingernail, and you'll notice I'm using a bright color. If you can't see your indicator, then it's not indicating, right? And I find that the more natural light colors like white that you'll find a lot of the more traditional anglers using simply can't be seen in this late season low angled sun. You can combat that by using dual tones. You might put black against white, or again something bright like this with a slightly darker material in amongst it. Now what I'm going to be doing is applying some Loon fly dip to really get in amongst this indicator. Carefully unscrew it so you don't spill it, dip the indicator in for a few moments, refit the cap, place it down somewhere very safe. Now blowing the indicator dry, and straight away it's impregnated right throughout those fibers. I'm just going to give them a bit of a jazz up so the fibers mix in, and now I am ready to go. I've slid this down to within 3 feet of my 2 nymphs, both a small size 18 Mayfly nymphs with small 1.5 mil brass beads. I don't want to be too heavy here because it is low water and these fish are likely to be right in towards these edges. Now, the way I'm going to approach this riffle is first of all from downstream. I'm going to focus on looking through the riffle and reading it like a bar graph, looking for any little current seams coming down here, 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 and here. And I'm going to focus on working my way up through there. Now, in amongst those food delivery systems, those current seams, I'm going to see little pockets, maybe little gutters or drop-offs or holes, places that fish could happily sit. Now, remember, trout don't need a lot of water. All they need is enough water to flow through their mouth and through their gills. All they need in the far stuff is a small rock so they can sit behind to have the water hit it, aquaplane over top, and they can sit there in relatively comfortable water, feeding as much as they want. So do not discount that really fast white water at the top of the riffle. Chances are that will be our hotspot for the day. Now, as I approach, I'm going to break the riffle into a series of small squares, grids. I'm going to start off fishing this square, then I'm going to fish out there, fish there, and fish there. If I think there's a nice looking bit of water there, I might work through it a second time, before moving up and fishing that next little section above me, there, 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 and there. Slowly move my way through. Now in very productive water, I might throw 3, 4, or 5 casts through each small square. In less productive riffles, those squares might get bigger and might only warrant a couple of casts. Identify the best of the water and spend the most time in the best water, because that's where you're most likely to find these fish. Now let's go have a quick fish. Right, I'm starting off just below the riffle and I'm going to slowly work my way into it. Now up behind you can see the shape of the riffle, that calm water on the very edge. You can see the fast water in the middle. But you can also see that transitional flow, the stuff that starts getting a little bit of current between the dead calm and the fast water. I tend to call that the fuzzy water. And the fuzzy water is perfect brown trout water. So I'm going to be keeping an eye through that. Now I'm going to be able to sight my way through a lot of this riffle, but I'm probably not going to see the fish as easily in that fast stuff because these Mataura trout are masters of camouflage. Combine that with the low angle light that we have, being in autumn, and these fish could be right in front of us without knowing they're there. Even when blind fishing, always keep your eyes open. In each and every cast, I'm constantly scanning to make sure I haven't got a flash or a hint of anything in front of me that I should be targeting. Now I'm going to start off in the slower section down below, sighting through the edge. I'm going to then put just a couple of casts out into that current to prospect as I move through. However, it's not until I get into that nice riffly stuff just below that gradient change, which is where I'm going to really start focusing on searching this riffle with my flies. Okay, so I'm going to start off with some longer drifts through here and a longer line because it is calmer, flatter, brighter water, and these fish may see me from a wee way away. However, notice that once I move up into the riffle itself, my line's going to get shorter so I have better contact with my nymphs. I have less line laying across a multitude of currents creating drag, and I can then get my lighter nymphs down deeper. I'm also going to keep my rod up enough to keep a lot of that line off the water, just so it's my indicator and my nymphs that are working through under a nice drag-free drift. As long as you move slow and you don't use any big wish-washery hand movements or cast the entire arm like you see so many experts do on YouTube and stuff, I believe that you can get right in close to these fish without them noticing things. Remember, a short cast only requires a short stroke, like throwing a ball to a person standing only 2 meters away from you. You don't need any large movements, any fast movements. Just keep it crisp, keep it smooth, and put that fly where it needs to be. Okay, now I'm approaching very slowly, and first thing I'm doing is looking in the shallow water just alongside this rock, watching for shapes or shadows or any sort of movement. My first current, as you can see, is pretty much about half a metre out from the rock and runs all that way up into the fast water. The next current is about 1.5 metres to the side, coming off that whitewater pocket you can see sort of just to the right of centre screen. Then you've got that main current washing down the middle of the river. And that main current is going to be a bit of a gold mine. However, don't discount the minor currents. As I sneak up, my goals change. I've got all these little pockets on our right hand side and super shallow water I'm going to investigate. Firstly by looking through it, and maybe if I don't think I can see fish through it, but it should be there, put cast through. Now this little section of river here might only be about 30 metres, 40 metres long, but I'm expecting it to take me a good part of 3/4 of an hour or so, if not longer, to work through. There will be numerous fish in here, and it's a case of just reading the currents, looking at the gradients, looking for all these little seams and pockets, and figuring out which ones the fish are in and how I'm going to deliver my fly to them the way they want it. Okay, what I've got up here is a fish nymphing in a shallow riffle. Now, because of the clarity of the water and because I can see the fish clearly, I'm going to remove my indicator. One of the beauties of that New Zealand strike indicator system is I can just pull that section of rubber down, remove my indicator, and my lead is still legit. It's not weakened, it's not kinked, it's in good condition, and I can get my fly to this fish very shortly. Now, when he moves, I'm not going to strike. The moment he stops, bang, I'm going to strike. Now he just rose then. So I'm actually going to watch the situation for a little bit longer, and if he continues to rise, I'll switch to a dry dropper combo. Probably a small size 16 parachute with a small size 16 or 18 nymph beneath. Let's go for it. Well, we got him. First cast is out to his right because we saw that he was feeding to his right. He is very, very happy to come along and take that nymph. It always pays to watch how a fish is feeding and which side they favour, how high in the water column they're feeding, and throw the bare minimum. You don't want to go too heavy if they're happy to lift and eat in the water column. On days when you're nymphing and not a lot seems to be happening, it pays to search out some more aggressive style riffles. Now, while mayfly nymphs may not be voluntarily drifting and letting go through here, bringing the fish on the feed, in this heavy water, there will be caddis, there will be little black stoneflies, there will be mayfly. They get washed off, and so fish will take advantage of them. Now, Euro nymphing or contact nymphing would be my preferred styles in this type of joggly heavy water, so I could certainly react to any immediate eats to my fly. Indicators may get sunk, however a bigger indicator, something bright, something that will suspend up a little bit, will fish through those edge waters. Certainly don't overlook this very, very soft water only a couple of feet out from the bank, through to where it gets fuzzy, through to that heavy pocket water through there. Definitely don't discount this water as water that is too fast for fish to sit in. Fish will happily feed along the bottom in here, hidden away by the rocks, sheltered from the currents, and feeding on a plethora of insects that will always be drifting downstream.